Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo
Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida. Thank you. Please be seated. Good morning. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We had an opportunity to go down to Los Angeles for a couple of days. We drove down on Wednesday, came back on Friday, and got to see relatives. So that was always a nice part of the holidays, is that you get to kind of spend some time, take time out and spend time with family and friends. Not all of us are able to do that. Certainly some of our relatives are far away, and we are unable to meet them. But whether we are in their presence or not, I'm sure that we are mindful of how their lives continue to be connected with ours. And although we know the story or the history of the first Thanksgiving Day, and although it's maybe kind of been exaggerated perhaps in some ways, the idea of being able to have our lives sustained by others is something that is certainly, when we're mindful, that we are aware of. Our lives are not just through the efforts, through our efforts, but are deeply connected with infinite causes and conditions that sustain us. Even if we had no connections with any life around us, independent and isolated, when we think about that, such conditions, even the water and the air that sustain our lives, the ground that we stand on, these things allow us to continue. Much to be grateful for. In Jodo Shinshu, of course, gratitude is an important part of our tradition. We always talk about kansha no nembutsu, the nembutsu of gratitude and appreciation. But before that gratitude and appreciation, there's a sense of well-being that we're grateful for. I tell this story often of the boy who's traveling alone on a train, and he's comfortable. He doesn't seem to be concerned about where he has to get off. And a little boy, and this can only, I always say, can only be in Japan, where it's traveled, where it's okay to put your child on a train and send him off alone. But this child traveling seems unconcerned about the stations that he's passing through, and the conductor looks in on him every once in a while and sees that he's quite content, not concerned, and playing and reading and occupying himself. And the conductor occasionally asks, "Do you know where you want to get off?" He said, "Oh yeah." And he said, "I'm not sure what the name is, but I'll know when to get off." And so the conductor again, kind of checks in on him every once in a while. And as they approach station after station, and the conductor looks in on him, he doesn't seem to be concerned. Then, at one station, as they are approaching the station, the conductor looks in on him, and when he looks in on him, the boy is opening a bag with an alarm clock in it, and the alarm clock is going off. Again, that can only be in Japan. You can set your clock by the train and where it will arrive at which station. So he knew that this clock was in this bag, and that his mom or his parent had set this timer, and obviously told him, when the clock goes off, when the alarm goes off, that's when you have to get ready to get off the train. And so he didn't have to worry. It wasn't necessary for him to know which station he had to get off on or when it would arrive. He simply needed to wait to hear this alarm go off. And so he was comfortable. He was able to enjoy the ride, knowing that he would be able to get off at the right station. This story can be understood as a metaphor for our experience as human beings. And the reason I tell this story anyway so often, it's really simple. I mean, here is a person traveling. Others are concerned because there are things to be concerned about. Where to get off, whether you know how to get off, whether you're safe, or all of these kinds of concerns that would normally occupy our mind looking at a little boy traveling alone. But the boy is unconcerned. He has a sense of well-being. He's okay. He knows that everything is taken care of. And the reason he knows that is because he has this reminder already planned for him by his parent that will take care of the concerns, these other concerns that people have for him. And when I think about this story, the question is, what are the things that would normally concern us in our, if we look at this as a big story, this journey that we all travel on, this train ride that our lives are a part of. What is it that concerns us? What is it that in our mind are the things that we have to worry about? The conductor, expresses that. The conductor represents all of these kinds of concerns that might occupy our lives. But the boy is comfortable. He's at ease, knowing that he will be able to know when to get off the train. And this parent that provides this awareness to him represents this something that provides us with a sense of ease, that provides us with the knowledge that we can pass through this and things will turn out all right. In Jodo Shinsho, again, the Nembutsu, we often refer to the Nembutsu as a Nembutsu, Kansha no Nembutsu, Nembutsu of gratitude and appreciation. And it is for the assurance that we too will be able to experience enlightenment, that we will be able to resolve the difficulties that we experience as human beings. The difficulties that, like this boy, not concerned of, because it's already taken care of. The most difficult thing, getting off at the right time at the right station, is already taken care of. In our case, the difficulties that we experience, resolved through enlightenment, is already taken care of, already assured. We experience all kinds of things in our lives. In Shinnan's time, I'm reading this book called The Nun Eshini, and Eshini is Shinnan's wife. And these letters that make up, the translations are contained within this book, and then the description of these, explanation of these letters by James Dobbins gives insight into not only Shinran, but also, and I think just as importantly, the historical context in which Shinran lived. What was his life like? What was his experience? What was the experience of the people who lived in his time? What were their lives like? And I often wonder, after Shinran was sent into exile, he was sent from Kyoto into Niigata, the kind of the northern part of Japan, and on the Japan seaside of Honshu, kind of across from the island of Sado, which is famous for taiko, onde koza, excuse me, and a very remote area, very difficult area. And so that's where he was sent to. And whether he married Eshini before leaving to go into exile, or whether he met Eshini while there. Eshini is thought to have belonged to a family that that may have belonged to. I took this out because I thought it would be. I was trying to have my phone out. Well, I have this cold that I've been trying to shake for about 2 weeks now, and it keeps coming back. But Eshini was thought to have belonged to a family that may have been in at least landholders, estate holders. Society's structure of Japan at that time, there was like fiefs. They had a bottom servant class, and then the servants and the peasants were tied to property and families. And they were the families that then managed and occupied property. And the servants, the peasants, worked, cultivated fields, did the menial tasks that supported this upper class. I mean, it's thought that don't pay any attention. Thank you very much, Karen. That Eshini's family belonged to this class, and she may have belonged to a family that held property in that area, in the Niigata, Echigo area. So when you read her letters, she talks about the problems she's having farming her property. And that doesn't mean that she didn't go out actually into the fields and work the fields, that she belonged to a family that owned property. It's just that they were part of this strata of society that had these farms. And she talks about the difficulties that she experienced. There is I've mentioned this Hojoki by Kamono Chome, who lived in the same time of Shinran, who provides a kind of a window, a historical window to look and see what was happening in Kyoto at the time. And Kamono Chome, a Shinto priest who eventually left, became a Buddhist priest, lived in the hills above Kyoto, kept a diary that described what was going on in the city of Kyoto. And one of the things that he talked about was these famines that took place. And it's a contemporary of Shinran. And they were, in Darwin's description of Eshini, describes how she survived 3 major famines in her lifetime. And these famines, again, if you're, everything depends on the food production to sustain all of the life. And so if crops failed, whether to weather or drought, lack of frost, if for whatever circumstances the crops failed, then everything fell apart. You couldn't sustain the society. And there were 3 of these that took place in her lifetime. And Shinran certainly also experienced these things. It's the hardships that they encountered in their lives are very different from ours. But I often wonder, what drove tens of thousands of people to what Shinran was talking about? It was a very hard life. It was a life that was uncertain. It was a life that was within the context of this disruption, turmoil, political turmoil, these famines that occurred. Kamono Chome describes how the banks of the Kamo River were piled with bodies. And so everyone was familiar with death. Death was not far away. For us, we are also familiar with death. Some of us may have had family members who have died, very close individuals who have died. But death is off in the distance, in hospitals or nursing homes, not at homes. Even where 50 years ago, people came home to die, to be cared for, to die. today, although there is hospice, it's not until the very end that hospice might become involved. But that is kind of held at arm's length. One of the descriptions of that Dobbins gives in this book, it's the first time I read this, and it took a while to kind of sink in, but the way that human bodies were taken care of during that time, burial or cremation was just for the people who could afford it. And people who couldn't afford it, which was most of the people, the way the bodies were disposed of, the common practice was to simply take the body into an area in which the body was left, disposed of. It wasn't buried, it wasn't cremated. It was just left in like a field in which it was allowed to decompose. And birds and animals would feed off of the bodies as it decomposed. And so it wasn't, again, unusual for that to occur. And everybody was aware of how things constantly changed. And so this life which Shinran lived, and as Shinni, and the people of that time are very familiar with the difficulties that occurred regularly in their lives. The famine, the uncertainty, the political uncertainty, the social upheavals, all of these kinds of things that were taking place in that time may have been the cause to drive so many people to Pure Land Buddhism, which offered hope of a resolution to the difficulties we experience as human beings. And if you're a peasant working the land, you didn't have time to sit somewhere and meditate. You didn't have time or energy or resources to be able to study, to spend time to study the Dharma, to figure out, to listen to teachers, to figure out what you needed to do next in order to resolve the difficulties they experienced. It was a life that went from day to day, life that was filled with uncertainty. And I'm sure, there were distractions that you can become involved in. There were things that would allow you to enjoy times in your life. But the overall character, I guess, of that life was one that was extremely difficult. And so this boy traveling in a train, the difficulties that the people of Shinran's time experienced, characterized by the concerns expressed by the conductor. And the boy able to pass through those difficulties, assured of eventually resolving the concerns that others had, gave him a sense of well-being. So the people in that time, knowing that Amida Buddha assured all individuals of the eventual experience of enlightenment, the resolution of those difficulties gave them hope, something to look forward to as a resolution of the difficulties that they experienced. And again, whether it's simply a characterization of that time, there seems to be some truth to what that time was very difficult for a lot of people. Pure Land Buddhism has been around since the beginning of Buddhism, or at least early in the history of Buddhism. But it's not until Shinran's able to put this together in a way, in his understanding, that assures the resolution of difficulties for all beings, and is able to put that together in a time in which the hardship of life was palpable. People are dying in the streets. And there's a description in Kamala Chome's diary where as he walked the streets of Kyoto, he would see a lacquered and gold leaf wood being burned. It was so difficult at times that they couldn't get firewood. They couldn't go up and get firewood. I mean, they didn't have the energy to go and get firewood, so they would break the temple buildings or the contents of the buildings and use it for firewood. The difficulties that people experienced were right there. For us, maybe not so much. Maybe not so much. We have to maybe think about more carefully. We feel a sense of disease or kind of an uncenteredness, but not like starvation. Maybe some of us are having difficulty finding our next meal. But we're able to take care of that. Maybe we're out of a job and we're waiting till the economy picks up again and we can get back to work. The difficulties we experience are not as immediate, perhaps, as what was experienced by the people of Shinran's time. But I think if we are mindful of what we experience, that if we can begin to identify how our lives coincide with what is described within the Dharma, that the difficulties that we experience may be unnoticed to us, but we may see or feel, rather, this sense of dis-ease, an unsettledness, a disquiet in our lives. Then we can begin to move toward a meaningful understanding of our experience as human beings. That it's not just chasing from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, looking to satisfy that disease that we feel, that uncenteredness. But rather it's not within that pursuit of the next thing that we can find a resolution to the difficulties. But what Buddhism is describing is simply being able to see things as they are. What Buddhism is trying to get us to do is to see ourselves as individuals who look to things to resolve our difficulties, but the things that we look to provide no real solution. To begin to see ourselves as foolish beings caught up in this pursuit of happiness that goes unsatisfied. It's not that we're bad people. It's not that we're people that are somehow that something's wrong with us. But rather, if we understand what the Dharma is speaking to, is that we are unenlightened beings, beings that simply do not see things clearly, and as a result, either cause difficulties for ourselves or for others. And it is the resolution of these difficulties that the teachings are focused. And Shinran, even being catching a cold like this, this comes from the 9th chapter of the Tanisho. The working of blind passion also causes us not to want to go to the Pure Land and makes us feel uneasy, worrying about death when we become even slightly ill. Impossible, it seems, to leave this old house of agitation where we have wandered aimlessly since the beginning of time. Nor can we long for the Pure Land of peace, which we have yet to know. This is due to blind passion, so truly powerful and overwhelming. But no matter how reluctant we may be, when our life in this world comes to an end, beyond our control, then for the first time we go to the land of fulfillment. Those who do not want to go immediately are the special concern of true compassion. For this very reason, the vow of true compassion is completely dependable, and our birth in the Pure Land is absolutely certain. The hardships experienced by the people of Shinnon's time, this gave hope, a way of resolving the difficulties that they were experiencing, that they were bound in, unable to. There was no upward mobility. You were born a peasant and you died a peasant. Your future was uncertain. Even in a Shinni's household, people were, I want to say, given to other families. It sounds kind of harsh, but for instance, she gave people in her household to her daughter. They were inherited by kakushinni. So maybe not quite like property, but still, that's how they moved. Sometimes they could say, no, I don't want to go. But generally, they went when they were sent to in that household. It was uncertain. What would happen to you? And Shinnon's message, the absolute assurance of Amida Buddha, provided some hope for those caught up in this. Kansha no Nembutsu. It is for that assurance, that ringing alarm clock, that let the boy know everything is fine, everything is okay, everything will be fine. The resolution of the difficulties we experience will be taken care of. There is nothing that I need do. That allows me to see myself as I am. See myself in all of my foolishness, in all of my unenlightenment. Allows me to be, to recognize who I am, as I am. To begin to see things simply as they are. That assurance, whether it's real or not, I kind of hesitate to say that, but whether it's real or not, if we simply put that on hold, the disbelief on hold, it allows me to look more carefully at who I am. It allows me to see myself more clearly. This assurance of the experience of enlightenment. In the midst of my foolishness, that I am assured, allows me to see myself more clearly. And I respond. And I say Namo Amida Butsu in gratitude and appreciation for the assurance of rebirth, the assurance of enlightenment through the vow of Amida Buddha. This Nembutsu, Kansha no Nembutsu, an expression of gratitude and appreciation for the assurance of enlightenment as we are through the vow of Amida Buddha. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about my all of that clearing. Thank you very much.